Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. This is Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast, where we tell stories about the contribution Iowans and the state of Iowa has made to advance the civil rights movement. Past stories are being told, present actions will be highlighted, and preparation for the future will be discussed. Here is your host, Erica Nganyange.
Welcome to the Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. Our conversation today will be about wrongful convictions in our criminal justice system. According to the National Register of Exonerations, NRE, a total of 2,857 men and women have been exonerated from prison all across this nation after being convicted for crimes they did not commit. That is more than 25,600 years collectively lost. Like all other states in the country, Iowa is also on that list, with the 16 exonerees with a total of 103 years lost. To better understand this problem, I came to the Drake University Law Clinic to talk to Erica Nichols Cook. Erica is the lawyer and the current director of the Iowa Division of Wrongful Convictions since December 2016. Erica has a special calling. She believes she's called to be a fighter, and her fight is to free innocent people who are behind bars in Iowa prisons for crimes they did not commit. It's a great honor and privilege to have her on the show today to talk about the wrongful convictions in Iowa and some of the cases that she's currently working on. Erica?
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking your time to sit down and talk to me about wrongful conviction in Iowa. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about wrongful convictions.
So, born and raised in Springfield, Illinois?
Springfield, Illinois. Spent some time in Peoria. Did my undergrad at University of Illinois in Springfield. Got my first taste of innocence work there.
Okay.
There was a investigation-only project, and we would investigate cases and then look for pro bono attorneys for them. Worked as a paralegal for 5 years, decided that I might as well go to law school, and that's how I ended up in Des Moines. Went to Drake. Loved Drake, loved the legal clinic. It's a little surreal to be working out of the legal clinic now after having been a student attorney.
Yeah.
And so after law school, I went to Chicago, worked for the Cook County Public Defender's Office. Spent a few years in Chicago, did a lot of trials. I did a lot of misdemeanor jury trials, a lot of bond court. Then my undergrad got a grant to do more wrongful conviction work and to hire an attorney. So I went back to Springfield.
Okay.
And I started doing non-DNA cases. I did arson cases and child death, shaken baby syndrome cases. A few random, Chicago shootings, things like that. I did those for a few years. The grant money started to run out. If you're familiar with Illinois geography, most of the prisons are in southern Illinois. So my clients would be at Menard on the border with Kentucky and the Mississippi River. And I would have court in Cook County or DuPage County up in the Chicago suburbs.
A lot of driving?
A lot of driving. So I took a break and taught for a while. Then I did appeals.
Where did you teach? Here?
University of Illinois.
Okay.
Taught a lot of undergrads, master's students how to do legal research, and I continued working on a couple of cases pro bono that are, both Bill Moore and Shomi Campbell are now exonerees and released.
Good deal.
I hung on to them, and I did appeals for the appellate defender. It was supposed to be easier because, right?
Nothing is easier.
There's not a lot of travel.
Yeah.
Illinois is different than Iowa in that they have 5 appellate courts. And so occasionally you would get a case that wasn't in your home court of appeal. But I mostly did central Illinois appeals. I really loved research and writing, but I missed the client contact. And so Adam Gregg was the public defender here in Des Moines. 2016 or 2015, he started the Wrongful Conviction Division. First director he hired departed to go back to California. So then I joined in December of 2016.
Okay.
And we moved back. Been almost 5 years. And we've been working hard ever since.
Well, on behalf of folks in the state of Iowa, we're glad you moved back. So are you licensed then in Iowa and Illinois?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I maintain both. I haven't had any Illinois cases since Bill Moore was acquitted 2017, just in case. And it was my first license, so I keep it. And
okay.
It helps sometimes when we investigate a case from the Quad Cities to know a little bit about Illinois FOIA, how the counties work over there.
Yeah.
I have a lot of former students from when I was at the University of Illinois. I also taught for Southern Illinois University in their law school.
Okay.
I supervised all of their Innocence Project interns and ran that internship program. So some of them have become prosecutors. They're kind of spread out, Chicago and St. Louis. And
that's a good deal. Siblings?
I have siblings. Lots of siblings.
And one of your siblings in the legal industry? No?
No.
I
come from a family of nurses, and I don't really care for people when they're bleeding. I don't have any problem looking at autopsy photos. But if you're actively bleeding...
I'll look after the fact.
Yeah. And I think some of that comes from like when I waited tables in high school and college, people are always cutting themselves, right? I didn't like that. But crime scene photos and autopsy photos, they don't really bother me.
Really?
Not in the same way that like trying to stitch someone up does.
See, I can't do either one of those. I cannot look the crime scene. I don't know how you guys do it. That would be traumatized for me.
I do have one rule that I don't look at autopsy pictures or crime scenes involving children before bed.
Yeah.
You do those in the morning, so your brain has time to process it before you have to sleep.
Oh, gosh.
I learned that the hard way. Being in Des Moines has been great. I have a sister in Kansas City and a couple brothers that moved to Kansas City. I have one brother that moved up to Anchorage, so he never comes home. And and then I still have family in Illinois, so we go back. Yeah.
So you still have family in Illinois? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good deal. Why did you want to be a lawyer? Out of all these 2,000 fields you can be in, except nursing.
Yes, I know, definitely not nursing. I always liked mystery novels as a kid. I always liked figuring things out and kind of being that problem solver. Maybe it's being the oldest of 6 kids. You have to solve problems. My grandpa always wanted me to go to law school. His brother had gone and then left the family farm and never came back. He did heavy machine operating and farmed, and we lost him when I was an undergrad to pancreatic cancer. Ooh. I don't know. I really didn't have a lot of family support when I was in college. I know I went to community college. I worked. I got that paralegal certificate. I worked for a personal injury lawyer for a while. And then I got into a bigger firm where I got to do lots of different things, including some criminal work. And that was about the same time I did my senior project, the Illinois Innocence Project. So I kind of got the bug then that I really enjoyed the criminal work. I worked on a lot of course, family law issues in that firm.
Yeah.
Medical malpractice and school district issues and even estate planning.
So you touch everything.
When you're a paralegal, sometimes you can, right?
Yeah.
And it helped me really know that if I was going to go to law school.
And what type of law you want to practice?
Why was I doing it?
Yeah.
And a lot of people that I've met, they go to law school because they don't know what else to do, or they have some vision what the life will be like. And I knew I didn't want that firm life of billable hours and fighting about people's money. Oh, yeah.
I was about to ask you that. It's why you did not want to do the private law. It's a lot of money there.
I'm sure for some people. I just remember we would split up the Saturday mornings at that firm, and the associates that they had to be there on Saturday morning. They had to have the FaceTime. They had to bill. They had to recruit new clients. They had to go do this, go do that. Some of them didn't last long. They would end up in government jobs or, their marriages would fold, things like that. And, some people thrive there. It's their business. It's what they do. I was always drawn to the criminal work. When I was in law school, I tried to go work for a firm that did work comp. It was a really long summer.
So you kind of knew early on legal is where you kind of want to go.
Yeah, I think I took a year off, and so I was an older law student between going part-time and working and then taking time off. So I was 30 when I graduated from law school. Okay. And so I was one of the older ones, in my class.
That's older?
Yeah. Oh. A lot of law students will start right after undergrad, so they might be 22, 23. So I think having some, real life experience helped me narrow.
Yeah. It's tough to be 22 and know exactly what do you want to do with your life and jump in something like law school.
Yeah. And to be able to gain trust from clients and make good decisions. And
I don't trust young lawyers. No offense.
So, yeah, I did the criminal clinic when I was in law school. I spent my entire third year working with Professor Rigg. I did the intro, which was misdemeanors. We handle conflicts here in Polk County, so we get a lot of OWIs, some thefts. Then my second semester, I moved up to some felonies, and I did some assaults and things that were a little more interesting.
Yeah.
And then I got to pick a jury.
Okay.
Do a trial. I kind of knew then that I wanted to do trial work. I'd spent a summer doing appeals, and it's a lot of office time. You don't get to go sit with your client, talk to witnesses. And yet when you do trial work, what I learned in Chicago was you don't have time to really prepare as much as you would, to look at all the cases or to argue. You've got deadlines and you've got people calling you. When I was at the Daily Center, we would have 100 people on our call for that day. Wow. And there'd be 3 public defenders in there, and we basically split up everybody. You might have 5 or 10 people that had a private lawyer. Everybody else was a public defender client. And, you might do a trial in the morning and a motion in the afternoon and then do another trial the next day. And it was definitely a machine.
It sounds like.
Yeah. I like the trial process. I like, thinking on your feet, arguing and getting a resolution. Post-conviction work is a little bit of both, because it moves a little bit slower than trial work. You get to argue more law and do more investigation. I kind of found my groove when I went back to the Illinois Innocence Project. That was like 2012. It was nice to get to know the science, to look for experts, to, spend the day with your client and figure out
what went wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would you say has been the hardest thing for you to get here? The thing you had to sacrifice the most, maybe?
I don't know. I have a really supportive husband. Okay. And so without him, I wouldn't be a good mom.
He covered for you?
When I did a murder trial for Bill Moore, we did a post-conviction for him, and we won, right? He got a new trial. And it had been 22 years since his conviction, so we thought for sure they're just going to let this go. But DuPage County, Illinois, they don't let anything go. We had another 2-week trial, and then he was acquitted. The hardest part is being away from your family. Sometimes it feels like work never stops. Mm-hmm. I think the pandemic made that harder because you're working from home. It's easy to sit back down and or something pops up on your phone and to go deal with it and have that separation. It's emotionally draining work to do post-conviction, and especially the innocence work. To close a file is one of the hardest things I do. To tell someone there's nothing I can do to help them. It's not that I don't believe them.
Is it hard to switch on and off?
Yeah, it is. When my daughter was 3, she was going to a daycare here in downtown. And on a Friday, I dropped her off, and I was headed down to the Iowa State Penitentiary to see clients. And so I told her, Dad's picking you up tonight. I won't be back in time. I'm going to go visit clients. Yeah. She told her daycare teacher that Mom's in prison today. So Daddy has to come get me. Daycare teacher and I had a good laugh.
Did you? I was about to say, they probably, when they saw you the next time, they say, how's everything going?
Yes.
They give you that look, and it's like, well, this is kind of more than what they're saying.
Yes. She always looks put together, and then find out she's in prison.
You will never know about people.
Yeah. So I think, and I mean, we don't have any family in Iowa, but doing this kind of work is definitely, you feel a pull to it, a call to it. I like doing trial work. I like doing appellate work, but every time I tried to quit doing innocence work, I usually end up going back. Or I couldn't let go of a file, and so I'd keep it.
Just like Godfather said, every time I'm trying to get out, they pull me right back. Yes. Now, your job is to free innocent people, to give people their freedom back. Are you feeling like that's your calling?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel called to be a fighter. Definitely.
I like that word.
Always gone for the underdogs. My husband watches Chicago Bears football, right? And so he likes to make that as an analogy, right? Because they always lose. And there's something about fighting the good fight, trying to make things right, trying to fix things. That definitely appealed, to my personality or my nature of trying to fix it. Yeah. And a prosecutor called me unconscionable. a few months ago during litigation, and I was kind of dumbfounded because I was like, what you're doing is unconscionable. You have an ethical duty to justice, not convictions. Open your eyes. Yeah. And so now every time, at home when my husband doesn't like something I say, he says, well, you're being unconscionable. So that's the new insult. But, really, sometimes you can't free someone, but what you can do is you can fight for them. And a lot of my clients don't trust the system. They had attorneys who let them down over and over again, who didn't do the work. In Iowa, our post-conviction is handled by contract attorneys.
Yeah. Explain what is post-conviction.
So in Iowa, we have a statute. It provides a method for you to challenge your conviction in what they call a collateral action. So once you're convicted at trial, if it's a felony, you have the right to a direct appeal. And that appeal will look at legal issues and sufficiency of the evidence. Was there enough evidence to convict you? Or did you get an unfair trial? And that's really it. The legislature passed some reforms that says you can't even challenge whether you had a good attorney, right? Ineffective assistance of counsel on direct appeal. And so the only way to challenge whether you had good representation is now on post-conviction. So you have 3 years from when your conviction becomes final to challenge that. Or you have to prove that you have new evidence of actual innocence or material facts to raise the post-conviction after the 3-year time bar.
What happens if you did not do anything within the 3 years? So do you have to wait after 3 years before you can challenge it?
No, you can challenge it anytime your conviction is final. But if you don't file within that 3-year window, then you waive a lot of errors and issues unless you can prove it's newly discovered, that you couldn't have found it in that first 3 years.
That would be tough for people who have been wrongfully convicted.
Yes. The other complication is that a lot of people think, well, if you lose in state court, then you can go to federal court. But the federal deadline's 1 year for habeas.
Oh, boy.
So if you wait 2 years after your conviction's final, and then you file, and it takes 2 years for you to lose, and then you try to file a habeas, you're way past.
Way out.
And they don't have to allow it to go forward.
Can you file both of them at the same time? State and federal?
The strategic advice I give is, file your state post-conviction 6 months or so after your direct appeal is finalized, because that will toll your habeas deadline. And so then when the post-conviction is denied, you'll still have 6 months left on your habeas. So it's tricky, and it's not necessarily something that a lot of attorneys are familiar with. I would say your average trial attorney is not thinking about a habeas deadline or how to get the federal court to look at how Iowa is applying federal law. And our constitutional rights are both Iowa and U.S. Federal Constitution. Iowa is famous for giving more protection than the federal Constitution in some instances, like, same-sex marriage. I don't know that we're quite as famous for fair trials. But when you are advising a client and saying, hey, look, you have 1 year to file a habeas, and you have to exhaust your state remedies first. So you need to file your state to toll the habeas deadline. I think a lot of that gets lost in translation. You think about, how shocked someone could be when they're sentenced to life in prison and how little they're actually able to process and retain. I like to put things in writing. But, I have a lot of conversations with people who want my help, but don't really understand what that means. Because if I do win for you and we prove you had an unfair trial, or we succeeded on an actual innocence claim, that means you get a new trial. Yeah. And then it's up to the prosecutor whether we do a trial
or not, or just drop the charges and everything else. Yeah. What is justice in the eyes of Erica?
From a wrongful conviction standpoint, it's not being in prison for something you didn't do. It's probably an apology. It's the state acting together to correct an injustice. We recently, as a state, revised our ethical rules, rules of professional responsibility. 3.8 governs prosecutors.
Oh, really?
And we added 2 new subsections, G and H, that were pretty standard around the rest of the country, but Iowa didn't have yet. And they put a responsibility explicitly on the prosecutor that if they learn of evidence supports a wrongful conviction or that, that they have a duty to tell the person and to take action.
We did not have that in Iowa?
We did not.
Why is that? Because it sounds like straightforward.
Yeah. I don't know.
We are so good?
We're so good. We don't need it.
We don't need it?
All the Iowa prosecutors are so nice and forthcoming. But yeah, it's in the American Bar Association model rules. Over half the states had adopted it when we started advocating for Iowa to adopt it and make it explicit. There's a big difference between being unethical and being ineffective. And that's what I teach my students, right? Is you can work really hard for a client and do the best job you can with the tools you have. And you might miss something. And a court might decide that you were ineffective. That doesn't mean you were unethical because you were working diligently and you were trying to become competent. It's not the same thing. And the same's true for prosecutors. You could do everything you have with the information that you have at that time. And then 40 years from now, someone may come to you and say, look at this.
You missed this.
What happened here? And they should do the right thing instead of defending the conviction at all costs.
How much power do the judges have in the wrongful conviction cases? If I'm the judge and I can smell it, something is off here. Do I have the power as the judge to say, hold on, I declare mistrial. We're going to redo this thing.
So judges have their own rules of ethics, and most of that goes to whether they have to recuse themselves from a case because of prior involvement or prior knowledge. Just like everywhere else, a lot of prosecutors become judges. We do have public defenders that become judges and people from private practice. The judge has to rule on what's in front of him. And so that's why it's so important as a legal community that we do the best job that we can. So we give the judge what he needs. And
so you mean judge cannot get outside of what has been presented?
For the most part. I mean, there is like a judgment notwithstanding the verdict type of situation, right, where they could say the jury got it wrong. It may be on certain counts or something, but you don't see that really happening in criminal cases. Judges really respect a jury's verdict.
And we do want them to do that.
We do.
Yeah.
But their job is to rule on the law in a jury trial and what's admissible evidence, what's not. In a bench trial, they're also the fact finder. So.
But Erica, come on now. I listen a lot of wrongful conviction with Jason Flom. And you hear these cases from the beginning to the end. I'm not a lawyer, but I can smell from the beginning something ain't right here.
Yeah. I think some of it is a conditioning. As a former Cook County public defender, where you're in the trenches every day, there is a certain feeling, right? You see the same thing over and over again. I think judges are human too, and maybe they've bought into the state's theory, or they've prosecuted cases like that in the past, or as a member of the community, they also want to see someone punished. I don't want to speculate too much about that, but we have a lot of cases that are really hard to overturn because the evidence was so flimsy at trial, but yet they didn't stop it.
And wrongful conviction don't do no good to nobody. If we had a rapist out here now in the street and we put the wrong person in prison and that rapist is still out there, he's still doing what he does. So we're not real safe.
No, and that's the argument. The Department of Justice, there's several grant programs through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and our office has received 2 grants now from the federal government to investigate wrongful convictions in Iowa. And so our first one was focused on cases where DNA could exonerate. Basically, as a result, it's named for Kirk Bloodsworth, who is the first exoneree from death row based with DNA.
That has nothing to do with your name, does it?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, Kirk is a fabulous speaker, person, advocate. He works for Witness for Innocence now for death penalty abolition, and is based out of Maryland. But he was the first person exonerated from death row with the use of DNA, and so they named this grant program the Bloodsworth Grant. And so it gives you money to investigate cases and do DNA testing, because DNA testing is expensive. The state doesn't want to pay for it. Every county attorney, if you say, okay, I'm going to pay for it, they're like, oh, all right. I don't care if you test it.
Mm-hmm.
Not every county, but most counties.
I mean, the state is the one who puts you in prison. They don't want to pay to get you out.
Exactly.
How many prisons do we have in the state of Iowa? Do you know?
Well, there's 2 main maximum security prisons.
Okay.
Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison. The old prison is the oldest one west of the Mississippi because of the conditions. They had to build a new one a few years ago. And then there's Anamosa State Penitentiary. That's also maximum security level lifers and things up there.
Okay.
There's more medium like Fort Dodge, Mount Pleasant, Clarinda. IMCC in Coralville is kind of the reception.
Okay.
Newton. Mitchellville is the only women's prison we have.
Okay. Do you know roughly how many innocent people do we have sitting behind bars in Iowa today?
You know, we have kind of an active docket, usually of 10 to 12 cases, because I'm the only full-time attorney in Iowa right now. I'm the only public defender assigned to post-conviction cases. Every other post-conviction case is handled by a contract attorney. That means that they're an attorney in private practice who has taken some training, and they have a contract with the public defender to get reimbursed $63 an hour to handle post-conviction cases. And the public defender's office caps how much they can bill without permission from the court to go over, things like that. So a lot of those attorneys get on that list when they're new to get experience. But if you've never done a trial, how are you going to find errors in a trial transcript?
So we have one full-time person on the wrongful conviction division in Iowa.
And I do have an investigator now. She started in October.
Oh, no, we need like 15, 20 full-time lawyers to do that work.
Well, we are going to be welcoming a grant attorney this fall. Our most recent grant from BJA we wrote it and requested funds to pay an attorney for 2 years. We've done some interviews, and we're kind of waiting for bar results this summer, and we hope to have someone start in September to really help us litigate and, find the next round of cases for litigation.
Okay. How many cases are you working on right now on a wrongful conviction?
I've got about 10 active cases that are either litigating or really close to litigation where we've investigated and we're consulting experts. A couple of our cases, we did DNA testing, and the DNA testing was not definitive. So it doesn't exclude our client. And now we have to either investigate again to see if we have something else that can be litigated and decide what to do for that client.
I was so naive in the past, I don't know. And I was thinking, wow, cops knocking on your door. You got handcuffs. You gotta be doing something. I mean, you can't be 100% innocent until I find out, oh yeah, it does happen. How do we get here? How does somebody get investigated, charged, trial, convicted, and sentenced, and they are innocent, 100% innocent? How do we get here?
Yeah, every case usually has more than one quote-unquote cause of wrongful conviction. When we teach our classes to students, we focus on the different causes of wrongful convictions, which we get from the National Registry of Exonerations. That started at the Michigan Law School, and they have taken data from exonerations and looked at what went wrong, what was the deciding factor that proved their innocence or at least got them a new trial.
I look into that website at University of Michigan, and I highly recommend anybody who never looked at just go in there, because they'll break down how many years somebody spent in prison, how the case was, how bogus the case was from the beginning. It's going to blow your mind.
It's overwhelming. I always recommend students use it when they're doing research. Sometimes when we start a case, the client will write us and say, I'm innocent. I wasn't there. I didn't know this person. And they're like, okay, but what are we going to do for you? And so we will read the trial transcripts and we will look for red flags. I try to teach the students to look for things that are traditionally recognized as a cause of wrongful conviction. Look at the investigation. How long did they actually investigate the case between the crime and the arrest of our client? What's the confession, quote unquote, statement? What does it look like? Look at our client. What about him or her particularly vulnerable to a confession? And then what was the forensic science? And
junk science, is that what they usually call?
Yeah, I've been trying to train myself to not say junk science. It makes some people very uncomfortable. But the courts like to, if I say unreliable, shoe prints are unreliable, Your Honor. You can't tell me this shoe print only belonged to my client because shoes are mass produced.
Yeah. And I'll be the one that sit in the back. That called junk science, Your Honor.
I wish you'd been in
Get him
Cook
out.
County last week with me.
Get him out. Now, why is it so hard to get the innocent people out of prison? Why it takes another 3 years before somebody can get out of prison and we already know right now they're innocent?
Most of the time, not everybody agrees. The Juan Rivera case out of Lake County, Illinois, is one example that I like to point people to because he was tried 3 times. Even after he was exonerated by DNA, the prosecutors came back and said, well, maybe the semen on the victim is from her boyfriend. And maybe the 12-year-old had sex with her boyfriend before Juan killed her because they couldn't accept that he was innocent.
Yeah.
Then they planted blood on a pair of tennis shoes that they said were his and was the victim's blood. When they investigated it, the shoes weren't even manufactured until after the murder. So he couldn't have been wearing them when he, killed the victim. So there's something we call tunnel vision in law enforcement, and you'll meet prosecutors who tell you, I'm not a part of law enforcement, but they are, right? Mm-hmm. They have full access to the agencies. They approve search warrants.
Yeah.
They decide to bring charges, and they work closely with law enforcement. And so they are also, vulnerable to tunnel vision and bias, where they decide that this was a bad person and the ends justify the means, or they decide it doesn't matter, that we didn't check out these other people because we got our guy.
How do we protect ourselves? What do you tell people like me so I do not ever become a client? How do we protect ourselves so we don't get there other than don't say anything? Because I see this all the time. Innocent people always be like talking.
Yes.
How do we protect ourselves?
I think most of the exonerees I've talked to have said that I was innocent, I had nothing to hide. So I agreed. To talk, to give samples, take a polygraph, whatever. And I think in today's climate, where DNA is very prevalent, my best advice is to cooperate to a degree, right? If the cops come knocking on your door, be respectful, but also call an attorney.
Yeah.
And get some advice. Obviously, there is no guaranteed way to prevent a wrongful conviction from happening to you. One of my favorite exonerees, Audrey Edmonds, she wrote a book, It Could Happen to You. She was an in-home child care provider, and a baby lost consciousness in her home, and then she was charged with that baby's murder under a now kind of disputed theory, right, of shaken baby syndrome. When she gives her talk, she explains, I was just a mom taking care of my kids, trying to make a little extra money, and I didn't know this baby was sick. And she did 12 years in prison while her kids grew up without her. I think that is why the reforms are so important, because you yourself can't necessarily prevent it from happening. Mm-hmm. You can educate yourself, right? Yeah. But you can't stop some emergency room doctor from saying that your kid has been abused when your kid hasn't been abused. Yeah. And or some insurance investigator from saying that you set your house on fire when you didn't. And so kind of supporting those reforms, we've been pushing our fire marshals in Iowa. They don't have any special qualifications, even though the National Fire Protection Association says they should. They don't.
And they will get called to the trial.
Oh, yes. And admitted as experts. And
that's dangerous.
I represented Patrick Thompson in his murder trial, and I challenged the qualifications of the fire marshals because they couldn't explain basic physics. They couldn't explain how fire behaved, that it was a matter of, a solid becoming a gas, what a unit of energy was. They didn't know. They just knew that this fire was too hot and too fast to be an accident. And so because Patrick was a bad guy, he did it. And 2 girls died, and somebody had to go to prison for that. Wow. And so, he's 25 and he got life without parole.
Wow. So who are the top Iowa exonerees?
The most famous ones are probably Harrington and McGee from Council Bluffs.
Okay.
Where the police department famously hid evidence.
Oh, that do happen?
Yeah.
Oh,
And they got a settlement. There's also Mary Weaver, which was a shaken baby case. And I like to think of her case as being the catalyst for getting rid of our state medical examiner, Tom Bennett, who was unqualified. But there's a handful of others that Aguilera and DeSimone, people that got retried because the appellate court, found a Brady violation on appeal. And then once the jury had the full information, they acquitted.
Yeah. Man. Erica, thanks for your time.
Sure, thank you.
All right. That was Erica Nichols Cook, director of the Iowa Division of Wrongful Conviction. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation. Thanks for listening to Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. Until next time, peace and love.